Jane Pejsa is a Minneapolitan. She is a multiple prize-winning biographer, and she has recently produced a really fascinating book about World War II. It's called The Final Encounter and deals with three of the war's most storied warriors: General George Patton, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, and Marshal Georgy Zhukov. And what makes it so fabulous is that she spent considerable time in Europe doing some very original research, and as a result, she has come through with a most novel twist in this book. We're very pleased you're here.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
That was quite a challenge, coming through with a book that is so about World War II, where hundreds of books have been done, with an absolutely novel twist.
Well, it sort of started with watching the Patton movie for the 5th or 6th or 7th time.
So you're saying that if we should, no one want to know about Patton, the movie is accurate?
The movie, from my point of view, it's accurate. Maybe not all the details. But I thought Rommel and Patton, and those who've seen the movie will know the scene where they ought to have met, but they didn't, and Zhukov. I thought, I must bring them together, but how can I do that? They're all dead. I must have to create a place in the
So
hereafter.
you did a fictionalized version where the three men come together just before the hereafter, or between, sort of in a waiting room.
Well, in an antechamber, I call it.
Okay.
And
they talk about their confessions, their regrets, and so forth. It's fascinating.
And they have some arguments. There's even an arbiter who has to come in sometimes and sort of quiet the discussion. But eventually they understand each other. They ought to. They were similar characters, but quite different from very different.
The research was so remarkable in that, first of all, you did a tremendous research with Field Marshal Rommel's son, who gave you all sorts of information, and you also had 81 letters that he wrote to his daughter. You talked to Zhukov's translator, who was very good, and you talked to Patton's family. So out of that, you were able to put together a remarkable collection.
And put in some vignettes that are history, but never quite made it to the books.
Yes, that's right. It was very much original stuff. So let's talk first of all about Rommel. What was great about him, and what surprised me about his unexpected demise brought on by Hitler?
Well, they used to say he was the Führer's favorite. He was like a film star when the campaign in Africa was going well. And I happen to know well, believe it or not, 4 men who served under him in Africa, and they all adored him.
These are Germans who
all Germans
fought under him in Africa.
That's right. He was very, very popular with Hitler, and he was very loyal to him. When some of the others were, some of the other generals were very much wanting to, a few, get involved and get rid of him. And
when some generals actually attempted to kill him, Rommel wasn't part of that.
He wouldn't take part in it. He naively thought, I think we can do it without that. But he was trying to get surrender on the Western Front. So
after the Allies invaded, he decided that there was no hope, and he wrote a letter saying for a political solution, right?
And political solution has special meaning in German, and it meant surrender. And then, presumably, at first, they could all go fight the Russians. Well, you can imagine how Zhukov loved to hear that in the hereafter. But it didn't happen.
But am I correct then that I didn't know this before? Hitler sent a note to Rommel saying, commit suicide or your family will be in trouble.
No, well, it's a little different. Hitler sent down 2 senior generals with the idea of taking him to Berlin for trial. And there would be a military trial, and he would be thrown out of the military. And he would go into the People's Court, which was a horrible place, anyone who ended up there. It's torture, forcing them to name names, and then death. But he gave him a choice, and in the library of his home, these 2 generals said, we have a pill for you. And if you take this pill, your wife and son will be taken care of the rest of their lives, and you will get a hero's funeral. And the alternative was his wife would go to a concentration camp, and he would certainly not have any pension or anything.
So Hitler, despite his high regard for Rommel, when he got this letter saying political solution, he became so infuriated, such a madman he is anyway, that he said, okay, you're going to be in major trouble. And so it wound up with a suicide.
That did. And the odd thing was his son had been he had been in an automobile strafing accident, so he was at home recovering at the time. And his son, who was in the anti-aircraft, as what they did with 15-year-olds at that time in Germany, was brought home to help his father. So it was his son who accompanied him to the car of his assassins, as I like to call them. And his father handed him the car key, or the house keys. He said, "I don't think I'll need these anymore." And of course he didn't.
Let's go on to Zhukov, because I am fascinated with that. This is the man that single-handed was really responsible for saving Russia. He
That's
did it
what
in
the
Moscow.
Russians say.
Yeah, Moscow and Stalingrad. He was ruthless. He would kill his Russians to keep things going, right?
Well, that's the way they were fighting, and Zhukov defends that was the only way. In the end, though, and of course he was the Battle of Berlin. He got all the accolades for that. It was a fierce, terrible battle.
Am I correct now? I think you made some point that if Americans had been allowed to take Germany, which of course you also forbade that.
If they had
that, the Germans would have surrendered quicker because they knew the Americans would be calmer and kinder, whereas Russia was so infuriated with the mass murders that Nazis did that they were going to destroy the town. Is that correct? And
the people. I mean, there are atrocities that can be recorded there very easily. Well, they had had so much against them that this was the time to take revenge. But it was also difficult. They fought so hard in Berlin. But truly, the Russians now see Zhukov as their savior. The place is filled with monuments.
Statues all over the country.
All over, and the most wonderful one that I like the best is in Leningrad. He looks like a Christ up there, except he has a military hat on.
He's what, 16, 20, 40 feet?
Yeah, well, not 40, somewhere between 20 and 25.
Well, that is. Now, in the brief time left, would you say that Patton deserved all the accolades? I know his men adored him, right? Was he that remarkable a general?
Well, I think so.
He was larger than life.
He was
egocentric. He claims
that he had the least, with all of his hard hitting, he had the least casualties of any of the other generals. There was so much competition among generals, and in the end, it was Eisenhower who kind of did him in by taking his command away from him.
Yes. Well, he was a bit of a loose cannon, wasn't he? Yeah.
But he too, I've become very fond of all of them. Each
well,
so different.
Where can we get the books?
It's at Majors and Quinn, and presently you can order it at Barnes and Noble, and I hope it'll be on the shelves soon.
And I have read it in basically one sitting. It was that fascinating.
Others have too. It's a good book.
Yeah, the research was so remarkable that it made it possible to do that fictionalized version. And
it wasn't difficult. It wasn't difficult.
So much original research. I was so impressed with that. Many thanks, Jane. I appreciate it very much.
I'm delighted to have been invited here. Thank you so much, Roland.
We've been talking to Jane Pejsa, and the book is The Final Encounter.